Joyce, welcome to Wednesday.
Here we are, my friend.
Another week. I see you're in San Francisco, virtual San Francisco at least, right?
I was feeling a little San Franny, a little sunshine, California, little Silicon Valley.
We'll be there, not in San Fran, but we're heading to West Coast in a couple of weeks. So looking forward to seeing Adina, of course. And then a bunch of meetings already set up and the weather looks good. That's important always. No fires this time. And we usually chat a lot more, but I'm super excited to let our guest in already because we do wish that we had a couple of hours with Esther, but since we only have her for about an hour, we're going to just dive right in.
Excellent.
Welcome, Esther. She's getting her camera and voice ready.
Set up. Okay, great.
Just so you know, I never got your original thing because I had you listed for 5:30 p.m. today. So I just apologize for the last minute scramble.
No,
Here.
good. We're gonna see you too, Esther. We do this on YouTube, all right? And we always like to say better late than never, or I guess in this case,
Right.
better early than never. So we made it. And honored to have you. We've known you for many years. I think I had hair when we first had you. Your camera is still off, Esther, just to make sure.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. Just no,
Thank you.
all good. So
Hey, Esther.
welcome. And,
Hello, Jim.
and you probably remember Jim from good old Health Excel days as well.
Actually,
Maybe.
it's been a long time to make this work.
Exactly. I picked you up once at a Newark train station, and you spoke at a pharmaceutical event that we were doing.
That sounds about right.
And I remember being on stage when Martin Kelly and I were biking around San Francisco, coming to our meetings, and Esther said that we should be careful if we had a few beers before the bike ride. So we were very careful after that. Those two memories that come to mind.
Well,
Just trying to find another little thing to make this
a little higher.
Yeah.
Ah, there we
There
go.
we go.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So welcome to the shot. All
Great.
all good. I can't believe it took us almost 5 years to get you on the shot with us. Jim and I started doing this right in the midst of the pandemic, and we thought that we would stop, but we kept going. So here we are, almost 100 this is, I think, 165th episode. And so would love to, we typically ask our guests, because it's also good to know for our millions of viewers and listeners, get to know the guest. And so we ask our guests to take us through your journey, both professional and personal, and tell us a little bit of the story. And then Jim and I usually interrupt very rudely throughout and dive deeper. And then we go from there. And then, of course,
projects that you're working. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really know the premise of the podcast. It would be helpful just to hear 2 sentences first. Thanks.
Yeah. So first of all, this was Jim and I intervention during the pandemic. I think as both of us were pretty extroverted people, we needed a mental health break. And so the idea behind this was that we go to conferences, and unfortunately, many times on stage, it's a lot of yap and we joked around a bit that a lot of these discussions, that the real discussions, what's happening in the front lines, what's happening in digital health, really happens over a drink at the bar, right? And that's where you get to know. And so this is why the shot of digital health therapy, we're not drinking, however, but the idea was to get the guests in the healthcare industry to open up, tell us their story, their experiences.
And like you, Esther, we have this great network of amazing people we've met either a little bit or we've known them through different events. And so we said, can we just have a half-hour conversation with them, call it the shot of digital health therapy. And every single week for the last 5 years, it works. So we come out of the podcast certainly rejuvenated. So we take a little bit of energy and innovation off of people, and we just share it and post it up and talk about subjects affecting healthcare. So that's it. So it's a little free form, as you might expect. And then we just want to share amazing guests with our audience and contacts and people we know.
Great. Thank you. That helps a lot. So you want my life story?
Yeah, we want your life story.
Born in a log cabin.
Yeah, we love it all. I love it all. Great.
I grew up in a bubble. My dad's boss was Oppenheimer. not at Los Alamos. This is well after the war at the Institute for Advanced Study.
Yep.
And yeah, pretty much from the beginning, it wasn't so much I was trying to escape, but to explore. When I was 13, I got my father to send me Lewis and friends of his outside London. When I was 16, I went to college and joined the college paper and rarely went to class. Got a sort of intellectual dishwashing job with a nonprofit. Then for 3 years was a reporter fact checker for Forbes, where I had this notion that the Japanese computer industry was a threat, but software maybe not so much. And the guys from Forbes said, you can go, you just need to take your own vacation time and you have to pay your own way, but we'll let you represent yourself as a Forbes reporter. So I took half my year's salary and went to Asia and Hong Kong, Seoul, Taiwan, and finally Tokyo, where I met the guy who ran, I think it was Fujitsu System Software. I took him out to dinner as a Forbes reporter.
Yep.
We sat down and I said, so I'd really like to talk to you about your system software strategy. And he looked at me and said, so funny to hear a woman ask about software strategy. Yes. The dinner was a waste, but I did have a cover story about becoming Japanese computer threat in the end. So it was amazing. Anyway, much faster now. Spent 25 years with a tech newsletter and conference. Then floated around, trained as a cosmonaut in Russia, got really interested in healthcare, invested in 23andMe for the education, fortunately, because I did not make a financial return.
We'll double click on that later for sure. Not in your financial return.
Yeah. And then just the more I looked at healthcare, the more it was like a repair job for damage that shouldn't have happened. And to me, the question was, how do we keep people healthy? If I got unlucky with 23andMe, I got lucky with Square and Facebook. And so I had enough money ultimately to fund 10 years of the Wellville project, which was working in 5 small communities and helping them to build not so much this program or that program, but just to build social fabric. And that ended December 42nd of 2024.
December 42nd.
Yes. And now I'm about to write a book called Term Limits about finite humans in an age of infinite AI.
Oh my gosh.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's go backwards. What triggered you, first of all, to even train for a space program? What was the aha moment? Or
Oppenheimer, there is an aha moment. The reason I was involved in the first place, Oppenheimer, my father was a physicist, did a lot of stuff with NASA, ultimately actually designed a nuclear powered spaceship called Orion that my brother wrote a book about. Space travel seemed totally sensible. And I was an investor in a company called Space Adventures, which was basically the travel agency for the 6 or 7 space tourists who went up. They represented Roscosmos. And so I was an investor, and they kept saying, you don't need to spend the 20 or 30 million. You could just at least get the training for a couple of million. And I said, yeah, when I'm no longer so busy. And then the magic moment you're asking for, I was, believe it or not, at an internal Bill Gates Foundation discussion about libraries, whatever, and got a phone call from my sister, who is alive and flourishing, or I wouldn't tell this story, but she called to tell me she was about to have a double mastectomy because they discovered something, and we both cried. And then a month later or something, I was on and she was being treated. A month later, I was on the phone trying to set up some kind of meeting, and I had a conflict. And if I just said a double mastectomy, I could cancel. What?
Yeah.
Something's wrong with your life if you need a double mastectomy to cancel your meetings. So, I probably took a day or two, but basically I called them and said, when's the next opportunity? And it was September 2008 to March 2009.
Yep.
And I went and lived in Star City for 6 months and canceled all my meetings except for one miraculous day, which is February 12th, 2009. I had 3 separate board meetings that day, and I just told all of them, can't come. Training as a cosmonaut, sorry. And I did not get the lottery ticket of getting to go, which, yeah, I was back up to Charles Simone, who wrote Microsoft Word. This was his second trip. On the other
I was
hand,
going to
the
ask
lottery
how they
ticket-
decide. It's just a pure lottery ticket then?
No, I'm
Like-
joking. I'm joking. The lottery ticket would be if
Okay.
Charles,
Okay.
for some reason,
I
not being able
took
to
it
go.
like really.
No, but in fact, there was a lottery ticket I didn't know about that did pay off. And before you go, even while you're still in training, in case you go, they basically inspect everything. It would be really bad PR. Someone went into space and died. Hard to. So they discovered I had Barrett's esophagus, which is a precursor to cancer of the esophagus. And so after that, I was being scoped every year. And in 2016, discovered I had cancer of the esophagus, but like stage A.
Okay.
And so, long story, but they took it out. And I still get scoped every once in a while, but
You managed
I
it.
would be dead otherwise because I had no symptoms.
Wow. Amazing.
Speaking of interesting health stories.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe just a little digression as far as just keeping yourself healthy. I know you go swimming, what does your routine look like? Just your kind of daily or
Yeah.
weekly health routine, and you travel a lot, just for all of us to learn. Just also.
Yeah. Over the past couple of years, it was so easy with Barrett's, and honestly, for your health in general, it's not good to go out to dinner and eat and drink a lot. And yeah, it's one of the best known things that it's a lot harder than stopping eating chocolate
Yep.
cake. But since COVID, I've been much more conscious of that. And so my routine is go swimming, eat a big breakfast, medium lunch, have something around 4 p.m., and that's it.
Right.
And I'm now learning how even to go to a cocktail party and not eat. It's amazing. They don't actually, people aren't tracking.
It's like, at first, it's socially awkward. Marina and I last
Yeah.
night met up with friends that we haven't seen in a long time at a bar here. And Marina and I had water with ice just because we know what
Yeah.
it does to our heart rate, know what it does to
Yes.
sleep. We didn't feel apologetic about it. We had a drink with our friends and we just happened to have water and they had wine. And that's
Yeah.
okay. No judgment.
You're right. It's harder when you're sitting at a dinner table. It's,
No.
and I figure one time a week is a good trade-off. Again, I don't want to die having suffered to stay alive.
Right.
On the other hand, it's a really nice feeling to come home from a dinner and say, I'm going to sleep well because I just
Yeah.
passed everything
Didn't overeat or didn't have a drink or
or didn't eat. It's pretty binary, it seems. It's basically if your digestive system running or has it stopped a few hours ago. And then I'm also doing the roving machine
Okay.
because standard female osteopenia, osteoporosis, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And
Yeah.
about to get a new device called OsteoBoost, which is built on the stuff that NASA did with vibration, except if you stand on a vibrating plate, it gets your ankles and maybe up to your knees. And this
Laura,
thing
right?
straps on your back. Laura, yes.
Yeah. I just spoke to her a couple of weeks ago, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Another investor of ours introduced
We'll
us. So.
put her on the podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
So like
Sounds good.
OsteoBoost. So you strap something on and it's a vibration treatment.
Yeah. And it's got approval and everything. And it's probably not going to get me the bones of a 16-year-old, but it's got to slow stuff down. And the stuff they're using now, the drugs for osteoporosis are pretty scary stuff.
Problematic. Yeah, certainly.
If you don't mind, we'll jump into how did you actually transition into being an investor?
So that's
What was that?
that's another
trigger, right? Yeah, that's
Right.
another transition, right?
Where
Yeah.
Facebook, right?
Well, it wasn't. I mean, so the point of this book, Term Limits, is you have term limits in time, but also in scope. And I had a newsletter and a conference. So I was a journalist. I didn't invest in stuff. And then I started going to Russia in 1989 and learning about the Russian and East European computer markets. I was writing about them. I started a newsletter also called Rel East as opposed to Release 1.0. Then this friend of mine, Lee Keat, said, you keep talking about how people should invest in Eastern Europe, and suppose I gave you $1 million. Would you invest it for me? And I said, oh, no, I can't. How much money did you say? Because in those days and in Eastern Europe, that was
Right.
quite a lot of money.
Sure.
And then the second newsletter was a complete labor of love. It was for free. And basically, it was my passport into Eastern Europe. People would talk to me because they wanted to be in the newsletter and I knew stuff.
Right.
And I realized, oh, if I showed up with money instead, they would probably still talk to me. So I ended the newsletter and started this fund, put in some money of my own as well, called Adventure Ventures. And that's how I got started investing.
Right.
My first investment was actually with Stepan Pachikov, who I saw his son on Sunday. He's the guy who in America founded Evernote, but he'd also
Okay.
done a company in Russia called Periscript.
Okay.
And he called me one day and said, Esther, if he starts his company, we want to give you 1%. The lawyer call, you say yes to him, please.
I know you can say this in Russian, Esther, by the way.
Yeah.
But, you know, for
How's
For
your
a-
Russian?
Huh?
How's your Russian?
How's yours?
mine,
Говоришь по-русски?
отлично. Могу.
Да, отлично.
You know,
Он прекрасно говорит
I-
по-русски.
Yeah.
Anyway, they ended up selling it to Silicon Graphics for, I think, 90 million or something. So I made basically an
That's right.
infinite return on my first Russian investment. After that, things weren't quite so lucrative. But so I started doing it in Russia and Eastern Europe. And the fund
Interesting.
basically paid off with 1 or 2 deals, and the other 3 or 4 vanished. But it was a great way to get embedded.
Right.
And then when I ended up selling the newsletter, then I started investing in the US.
And kind of in the digital health broader industry, Esther, you're one of those icon seeders, right? If we think about Health 2.0, I think you were one of the first and early investors. Startup Health that's been around now for what, 15 years?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah,
Or
I mean,
just
I was-
catching up with Unity, but
Yeah, I was an investor in startup. I am in startup health, not as an investor in Health 2.0, but I went to
Okay.
conferences and
Yeah,
time
yeah.
investor. Yeah.
Time investor. Yeah, fair. But just again, we started the discussion about health, right? And this podcast is about health. How did you look at the healthcare system and what was your initial thesis? And maybe how did it evolve over time, especially moving towards Wellville
Yeah.
timeframe?
First of all, I'm an angel investor. I don't have a thesis. I don't. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, fair.
I invest in stuff where I think they're doing something useful, where I think they have a chance of success, and where I think I'll learn something. So one thing that happened, I think it was 2003, I was at Renaissance Weekend, where it's very family oriented and pretty much everybody speaks on a panel or two. So I was getting interested in healthcare. I released 1.0. I did a conference on personal health information. And so I go to this healthcare panel, and it's 13 people on the panel. It's doctor, a nurse, a family physician, an ER guy, a hospital administrator, and all these wonderful, committed people explaining how horrible the system is. And I was one of the 3 people in the audience. And I just sat there and said, wow, if this was tech, we'd have free cures for cancer. We'd have a hospital chain roll up. What's going on here? And so I started thinking about that some more. Then I also interviewed this guy called Charlie Silver, who founded a company called Real Age, if you remember that.
Mm.
Basically, it was like a questionnaire. Do you live with a loved one? Do you have a pet? Do you eat late at night? Are you healthy? It talked a fair amount about behavior. It didn't address racism or poverty or anything like that. But it was a pretty good counterpoint to healthcare.
Right.
And I wrote the piece and said, I think this guy has done more for more people's health probably than most formal acute healthcare things ever do. Its business model was vitamin supplements. This is not it was good, but it wasn't like a social revolution or anything. And he ended up selling that to her as she sold it to ShareTer. But the thing that was so fascinating was who he had sold his previous business to before starting Real Age. Do you remember that, Eugene?
No, I honestly don't. Yeah.
Jiffy Lube, oil changes. And I thought, yes, maintenance. We do more for our cars than we do for our bodies. Then the third thing was being on the judging panel for the Healthcare X Prize.
Okay.
And it just, again, it was like, it was useful, but it didn't seem to address so many of the fundamental problems of why people get sick, as opposed to can we fix them later. And I got Peter Diamandis' informal position. I'd like to describe what I want to do as a Health X Prize. And I was going to give a talk at some event in 2013 and realized nice little white lady gets up on stage and says, somebody should do this. Not a very compelling talk. The tech industry giant gets on stage and says, I'm going to do this. So that's what I did. And I had no idea what I was doing. So the next step was to do 4 brainstorms of anybody I could find who might know something. And at one of them, this guy from Cigna showed up in a blazer and not like most of my friends.
Right.
But he asked really good questions. What are you going to measure? How are you going to find these communities that you want to help? What's the business model? And I took him to lunch and he asked some more questions and he still didn't go away. And I said, okay, do you want to be CEO? And that's how it all happened.
And that's Rick,
that was
right?
Wellville. Yeah, that's Rick Brush. It was originally 5 communities, 5 metrics, 5 years. It turned into 10 years. And so the thing that got me interested in term limits in part was Biden not resigning, Jimmy Carter dies, and everybody says, how sad. No, it was a wonderful life, celebrate his life. That's it. 102, forgive me, is not a tragedy. And then you may know Dmitry Zavin.
I know the name.
Yeah,
he was. Yeah,
he was a Russian philanthropist who funded Alexei Navalny, among other things.
Yep.
And 2 or 3 years ago, began to notice his symptoms of dementia. Decided to go to Switzerland to leave early. Called in both his co-founder and a movie maker called Vera Krzyzewska, and basically explained why he had a full life and done what he felt he could and was now ready to go. And it was just and then, of course, most recently, Danny Kahneman, it turns out, also went to Switzerland for euthanasia. So anyway, term limits and why are humans so much more valuable than AI?
So it's interesting. Marina and I can't wait to dive a little bit deeper into the term limits. Marina and I always say for the foreseeable future, human eye and that empathy and connection will be greater than AI. And so that's our philosophy in your coach, just around just the human interaction. And I think we all need it. And the one day people thought, oh, shoot, prompts, right? You can just do a prompt and it does the work for you. Guess what? There's a job called prompt engineering now, right? Like you have to be the best at prompt engineering. But anyway, I'd love to jump back. I'll be honest, just crazy day. I didn't get a chance to read I think it was a 29-page report in Wellville, right? The idea was around communities. The idea was around prevention. The idea was around sustainability of healthcare. Maybe just for our listeners, some key bullet points, some takeaways from this 10-year experiment. And then the question mark, what's next? And how do we make it bigger if it makes sense?
Yeah. It wasn't an experiment.
Okay.
And most particularly, it wasn't an experiment on people. It was a project to see how effective we could be to learn and to help the community to learn. So the first thing we learned was rather than 5 of us showing up in all the communities every once in a while, it was much more important to establish a regular cadence of one person that would then be the trusted person. And we learned how important it is to earn trust, which is why around 3 years in, we decided, boy, we should really do this for 10 years because we are now just establishing trust in some places, and frankly, in Niagara Falls, never managed to do that. And honestly, they didn't gain our trust either.
Yeah.
So instead of pretending it was working, we said, thank you very much. Then the community of North Hartford, Connecticut, tried to hire Rick. And we said, you can't hire him, but you can get him for free and become a Wellville community. So that's
Okay.
how we made that little switch. And basically learned the importance of fabric over architecture.
Okay.
There were lots of organizations, some of them with real missions, some, their mission ended up being their own perpetuation. And I see that a lot in philanthropy, because this pattern of getting short-term grants is just dealing drugs.
Right.
Yep.
You just keep coming back instead of actually doing whatever it is, a transplant or getting somebody healthy so that they don't need you. And we learned
And-
also that it's difficult to grow up in a poor place. There's lots of capacity. There are lots of wonderful people, but there's also a fundamental insecurity. And this is not innate, but during this, I was talking to this guy who basically does police force analytics, and his job is to find corruption and weed it out, among other things. They're probably looking at other metrics as well. And he says they come in clusters. And I say, yeah, the bad ones infect the good ones. And he says, no, lady, you're wrong. The bad ones know where to go. They find the places where they can get away with anything. And
Interesting.
I don't know if you see the movie
Interesting.
Training Day.
Oh, yeah.
A long time ago, I feel like. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not, that's the depths of LA is a whole different level, but there's a lot. It's the usual. The less you have, the more difficult it is to get anything. And helping people to find their own sense of agency and resilience, which an amazing number of them do. But I think one clear learning is, duh, lady, but we need more government funding for education, for childcare. We need wages that reflect the value of the work rather than the lack of agency of the people who take the jobs.
Yeah.
You mentioned government, so just a little offshoot, and we're not a political show here, but I'm just curious on your thoughts on the new administration. We haven't heard much on healthcare still. Just your kind of high level thoughts and
Well, we've heard a lot on healthcare already, and we've been watching all the people that are being considered. And it's like half of RFK is wonderful, the other half of them is destructive. And the fundamental notion that people don't need Medicaid, and that there is a fair amount of waste, but there's a lot more waste, honestly, in commercial healthcare, and a lot less need. And I spent enough time outside the US that I have no illusions that government-funded healthcare is a total panacea, but it's better than what we have here. And it certainly is. It's more fair in other countries.
And do you think some hints on prevention and food supply? We even have some folks, right? So if you take out the characters just for a second, right, and just all the stuff that we've been talking about at the conferences around prevention, more holistic approaches, food supply, processed food, behavior change, movement, all those things seem to be okay. Now let's see how the execution happens, right, around it all.
The trends are encouraging.
Yeah.
The challenge is it's really hard to get people to change their behavior. Taxes work. I would love nothing than to tax sugar, to make BHT and all this stuff illegal the way it is in Europe. And the signs that might happen are extremely encouraging. On the other hand, I believe in fluoride in the water. I believe in vaccines. And fundamentally, I believe in better education for kids so that they can't be manipulated.
So we
Yeah,
Take a
I
turn.
know.
Take a turn.
We make
Go
a
ahead.
turn, and the only reason because I think we can again, if we had Esther here for 2.5 hours in a long format, I
Right.
think we can go here. But maybe just as we started talking about some of the recent news and what we've been seeing, we would love your thoughts on 23andMe. I was one of the
Yeah.
maybe the earliest, but I got my test done as soon as it came out, right? And I just
Yeah.
saw Linda Avery did a huge post as well
Avey,
on
Avey.
this. Avey, sorry, apologies, Linda.
Okay.
We
Yeah.
did meet up here. We did meet up
You did.
here in Barcelona actually for coffee
Ah,
last year.
And
So it was a
have you asked
wonderful
for your
meeting.
data back? Have you asked for your data back, Eugene?
I actually did. I downloaded it. Question mark if I'm going to actually delete the account or not. But I've actually sent my DNA extract of 23andMe into space in one of the capsules a long time ago. I forget. It was an investment that Marina and I made, and it's floating somewhere out there. But anyway, that's a complete side note. So just curious on your thoughts, because I've been seeing a lot of posts of a lot of this hindsight of 2020.
I mean,
Should have, could
there's a
have,
lot of
right? But
there's a lot of piling on, Anne. So first of all, my entire genome, not just my SNPs, is up at the Personal Genome Project. You can find it, and yeah,
analyze
no
it.
one's or who knows? I kept expecting at least for someone to find it and send me vitamin supplements, claiming that I had the unique genetic profile.
Right.
In some sense, the data that's more valuable is the data of the sort of the phenotype things that people answered in the various questionnaires. But that's not accessible even to the new buyer without permission. And
Okay.
anything that exists that's quote sensitive data is vulnerable.
Yep.
And they had their own breaches, which they did not handle very well. But it's like, I'd be much more concerned about people knowing. I mean, in my case, I don't go out drinking a lot. The sort of stuff we know about Pete Hegseth, you don't need to know his genome.
Yeah, I hear
And
you. Yep.
and so there is still some value there. The real problem, honestly, was that like Mark Zuckerberg and a bunch of these guys, Anne had all the voting rights. And so the board was, yeah, it was great to sit on the board. As I said, I did it as an education. I learned a ton. I like Anne, got a lot of benefits from it. But I left before it became much more financially driven. And then they did the SPAC, which,
Yep.
et
Well,
cetera.
SPACs
And things just fell apart. And yeah, part of the problem is the business model. Your genome doesn't change. And yeah, for a while, it didn't matter because we were collecting new members, but at some point,
stalled.
yeah,
The growth stalled. Yep.
yeah, and a lot of things changed. Certainly, there were other people offering similar things. The notion of working with pharma made a lot of sense. It's just it didn't work out, and that's
Right.
23andMe is by far the only outfit that thought pharma was a godsend, and it wasn't.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And I think when I think of 23andMe, it's one of these when it goes in the way back machine, just transformative in terms of
Yes.
opening people's eyes up to the possibility of what could be done.
Right.
I would almost say
and taking
iconic.
interest in it. Yeah. And we very much saw it as an educational service. It wasn't just here's your data, but here's your data and here's what it means. And trying to explain to people the difference. You might have a 50% greater risk, but if the risk is 1%, it's not something you should worry about. So we had those little stick figures and you could see. And frankly, I think we helped a lot of people understand. I'm sorry, folks, if you have type 2 diabetes, it's not because of a genetic risk.
Right.
Yeah, there's some genetic risk in there, but your behavior is a much bigger factor. Whereas type 1 diabetes is a completely different proposition. And so
Right.
people who are interested learn stuff like that. What percentage of the population actually was able to take use of that opportunity? I always felt that people would look at the data and say, wow, it looks like I have a 400% chance of dying. And
Right.
yeah, that wasn't, but
Right.
just one thing. Did you know that going into space, if you're female, reduces your chances of dying of breast cancer?
Really.
Yeah.
How is that even derived? What are the numbers? What's the
The
end equal?
numbers are, if your chances of dying in space are 10%, which might be a little high, that reduces your chances of dying of anything else by 10%.
Okay.
All right. Fair
But
enough.
if you make it specific enough, people never,
Yeah, fair enough.
100% of the people who are vaccinated die also, which is really shocking.
Yeah, but then you have to expand that out. It's
course,
the
no,
old thing. I use it all the time. If you torture data long enough, it'll confess to anything. And
Exactly.
data
Yes.
doesn't speak. People tell the stories
Right.
about that data. And
Yes.
so,
Right.
yeah, it's fascinating. So let's get to term limits because you touched on it a little bit.
Yes.
And I think this human and humanity. So maybe give us a little bit more on the synopsis. What was the trigger to write the book or start writing the book now? And what
Yeah,
are
it
your
was,
expectations?
my expectations are, I hope that people,
A lot of people read it for sure, but
yeah, but that and they don't need to buy the book. Eventually, a lot of it's going to be on Substack and so forth. But that people realize how precious life is and how unique they are at a time when I'm within multiple cultures, everything from Russia to New York City to the science community and Silicon Valley longevity dudes. And the challenge is that part of the world is spreading its influence. And so there's this exponential growth is good. The more we have a good thing, we need more of it. As opposed to a good thing, let's have enough.
yeah,
Again, any artist will tell you, in order to do art, I need constraints. I need to build around something. Because whether you're an artist or a person, you can just get lost floating in infinity. Find your term limits, find what you're good at. And it doesn't need to be the same. You can change over time. There are term limits to roles, not just term limits to people, but some notion that there's stuff you focus on and then stuff you might collaborate with other people on, or things you might have a successor take care of, or something like that. But some sense that you need to make use of your time in the way that you are best equipped to do. And that too much is too much. There's this hunger for more, whether it's an addict looking for a drug or a longevity person looking for another 100 years. That doesn't give you satisfaction. And how do we go back, not to our roots living under trees, but to our roots of being human and valuing people rather than, I actually heard a guy from an
and less
AI, but I
agree.
won't mention it, and less angry. Yeah. I actually heard a guy recently at a conference, an AI startup saying, we see our employees as vectors and we just need to line them all. We don't need as many. I'm sorry, I don't
Yeah,
want to be anybody's vector.
right. Listen, for sure. Though the interesting part is, I think Jim and I had plenty of discussions, right? The new companies, the new startups, can you have a bootstrapped single founder with AI agents? And I think that's probably a little too far, but I think just from
Yeah.
a scale perspective, the companies don't need to get as big anymore. The new companies that,
No,
right?
they don't, but they don't
Yeah,
need to turn their people into vectors.
yeah, that's
And
for sure. That's for
honestly,
sure. I
I
mean,
would
people,
say every founder needs a co-founder. Back on interesting hallucinations. Did you know there are two Elon Musks?
no, actually did not.
There's the one that hangs out with Efron.
I thought the world had,
And,
oh, okay. One is good enough.
and then
Or,
and then there's the one that listens to Gwynne Shotwell. You know who she is, I hope. Yeah. You go into NASA. Okay, Elon, just keep quiet. If I need to say something, I'll poke you, but just be quiet. Don't do anything stupid. Remember, this is the government. They care about safety. So just still. And
Right.
apparently he mostly behaves. But that's what people need. They need a co-founder that will tell them the
anchor them.
inconvenient truth. Yeah.
Get the best out of each other. When you think about this, just staying with this kind of concept of like term limits for a second. So yeah, there are, and you work with all the Peter Diamandis and the longevity guys. The term limits are extending. So where do you think my term isn't just a semester? I might get 2 semesters. I might get an extra time. Where is your view on that? Are we going to now start to move in? Is there the momentum to have us be 120, 130-year-olds?
there's certainly a desire on some people's part. And if it's the healthy 120 years and I can do something useful, okay. But
Yep.
this obsession with it, I think, is dangerous and counterproductive. And again, so much of what's happening in Silicon Valley, number one, shows blindness to the rest of the world. And two, makes so many people feel inadequate. I'm not a failure because I didn't become Bill Gates. And just this notion that there's one way to succeed. Once in a while, I mention this dental hygienist I go to, whose name is Pamela, and she's amazing. She just takes the role of being a dental hygienist and perfects it, and it treats you well as a human being, explains what she's doing, just is gentle, but also I got to do this, girl, because I need to get in here. And I just,
Yep.
she to me is the epitome of success doing what she is good at.
Right.
And loves doing it.
Yes.
And
And loves the
enjoys
people
it.
she does it for. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do not want a robot dental hygienist.
You want, what's her name? What's her name?
Pamela Drucker.
You want Pam. Pam.
Yes.
I think everyone wants a Pamela. That's not easy. That's a hard job.
Oh, Tim, there's just so many. I know Esther also has this somewhere to be in a little bit. And so while I'd love to dig deeper into every one of these topics, maybe we go to your kind of last famous question, Joyce.
Okay. So
What is that?
So the famous question is this. So we're blasting ourselves forward to the outer ends of our term limits, and you're invited to speak on a spaceship.
I'm going. Ready.
You're going. You've got the right training.
You won the lottery ticket. Finally.
Now, before you go, everyone gets their teeth done by Pamela, the dental hygienist. We all end up in space together, and you're giving a talk, and you're reporting on the insights and discoveries of living this high quality life within your term limits, about the findings from Wellville. And as you're giving the talk, you see this young, dynamic woman. We're in space, so she's floating towards you. She's floating towards you. And so she's floating towards you. Go, Esther, before you leave and you head back to Earth, I just want to let you know I'm a journalist that moved into studying space care, that started doing angel investing. I spent my semester abroad in Japan. I've done so many things that feel similar to what you've done. And I'm about to start my new company, my new digital health technology company that's combining all these things together. What's the one piece of advice you would give to that younger version of yourself?
Well, she's already done. Take a job for which you're not already qualified, because you will learn. She seems to be doing that. She's probably going to make some new mistakes, but not repeat them, because she sounds pretty smart. And I think the final one, other than having a good co-founder who will tell her when she's not listening to us, is focus on the problem you want to solve. Don't focus on your technology or your insights, because no matter what happens, you're going to learn, and you probably are going to realize your product isn't the right fit. Focus on how you solve that problem. Be flexible, be willing to change and move. And also, if you're not the right person to be CEO, go be science advisor or be chief marketing person. Bring in a CEO, and don't fixate on the role you have.
That's
Love it. And I still
And
remember you
just one
sign off.
question. This question, I assume, comes in a somewhat different form for each individual, right?
absolutely
Correct.
Okay. It just seemed a little too.
It's all on the fly.
And Esther, as you always signed off way back when, always make new mistakes. So I think you started with that as a piece. So thank you so much for making the time. Appreciate you jumping on so many hours earlier that you had in your mind there, but we all appreciate you. Thank you.
Great.
Have a lovely
Thank
evening.
you, and have a great afternoon.